Thank you for joining our session. My name is Denny Wells. I studied sports science and completed my PhD in sports biomechanical modelling at the University of Western Australia before spending a year as a postdoc at Auckland University of Technology. I now work for Logemas, the Australian and New Zealand Vicon distributor, and I'm very privileged in my role to get to see into many laboratories and get to know all kinds of motion capture technology users. For this video, I thought it would be interesting to showcase the many hats that sports biomechanists can wear. By this I mean I wanted to provide a small insight into the variety of sports biomechanists just from Australia to highlight the different backgrounds and skill sets that can complement sports biomechanics and show just some of the different careers that can result from a biomechanics background or perhaps from learning biomechanics along the way. We have a special lineup for you in the next half an hour, a collection of our friends and colleagues who all have very different jobs but all share a common link in sports biomechanics. Amongst our guests we have an academic with a background in coaching, a clinician who added biomechanics to his repertoire to improve his practice, and an ex-professional sports star who now coaches and manages Olympians. Final thing before we start, a massive thank you to Wayne and the ISBS Conference Organising Committee for their hard work making this conference happen. We hope you enjoy this session. Please join in the discussion online with us using these hashtags, mostly on Twitter but also on other social media as well. Enjoy.
So I am at Edith Cowan University, and my title is Professor of Human Performance. But what that mostly entails is I do some teaching in research methods and applied biomechanics for strength and conditioning coaches, so in that cohort, and then also research mostly in looking at human performance. And I probably specialize in looking at elite athlete performance or looking at performance of female athletes.
I'm a senior biomechanist with the New South Wales Institute of Sport and national lead for biomechanics with Athletics Australia. So I work with athletics, in particularly track and field, with a wide variety of event groups. So it's not the same thing every day, which is great. And I'm very fortunate that I lead a network of biomechs that work with track and field around the country and each have great skill sets, great things to offer and work really well with all the coaches and athletes.
Yeah, my current role is I'm a biomechanist at the AIS, Australian Institute of Sport. That covers quite a few things, I guess, across the way we operate. The primary part of our function is to provide biomechanics servicing to the athletes that come onto the campus. And then we also do work with a few other specialised programs, such as the AIS Intensive Rehabilitation Program, which provides support to athletes coming back from severe injuries.
I'm head of athletic performance for Australian Women's Sevens team. So we just recently went to Tokyo and finished fifth, which was probably not what we'd hoped for. But prior to that, we were defending gold medalists from Rio. So covers a wide array of things, both from a management perspective and then also coaching. But it's really, really challenging but enjoyable role.
Now my role is kind of a hybrid in the sense that it's not classic. I didn't come from a classic sort of biomechanics sort of stream, sports science. It was really clinician derived, and then all the biomechanics sort of background has all been developed very much from just trying to get more rigor around the things that I have always done, which is try and work out if some levels of risk and whether someone's ready to go back, and very much from a clinical point of view. Obviously, I've got a clinical load that I sort of manage, and then what we do is we schedule sort of testing windows along the way. So, for example, someone who's coming back from like a lower limb injury, we'll generally go sort of more general themes, generic themes up to a certain point. So we'll get them up to the point where they're doing straight line running, they're tolerating sort of a certain amount of volume. Then the biomechanics aspect really becomes about dose response after that.
It's very different day to day. There's a lot of different technologies, particularly in athletics. So we'll use things like a laser, OptiJump, Vicon, force plate, camera setups, 2D calibration. So It's all very targeted towards what works for that event group or that athlete and coach or that DTE setup. From a competition perspective, things are very different because you, particularly domestically compared to internationally. So domestically, we can go into the infield and be able to capture a lot of data. When you've got Track Classic, which is sort of in Australia, one of our biggest events, is like on a 2-hour, 3-hour window at night, with every event group running at the same time. We work as a team to be able to capture the information that's critical to our athlete.
Ultimately, we're a speed, power-based sport. So, I mean, improving running mechanics comes to the fore all the time. You're sort of trying to push envelopes of speed and power. And probably the best way to mitigate that against injury is improve their running mechanics. So we are often always trying to break down running cycles or running gaits, how people move when changing direction, how people move when they're off the ground and they're getting back to their feet. So, you know, it formulates a massive part of our programming. That from a locomotive perspective is really important, the biomechanics. And then, you know, the non-locomotive stuff in rugby is the collisions. So tackling, cleaning out, being at the breakdown, those type of things are important as well. So you sort of try again to, you know, people that might not have grown up tackling or playing a collision sport, you're trying to teach them skills. So that's where, again, it's really important to, A, for the safety, but also from a performance perspective, being able to defend.
I'm lucky enough to be in the lab quite a lot. And I do make it a distinct point that even though I could probably sit back and be very professorial and have all my graduate students collect the data, the other half of it is probably liaising with partners and people, having conversations with coaches or industry partners, and or writing or editing.
One of the great parts about our job is that that not too many days are actually the same. So we can sort of be tackling a different problem on one day, and then later in the week we'll be looking at something completely different. So yeah, depending on the day, it depends on how much true biomechanics, I guess, we're doing. Sometimes it's just about being a good member within a multidisciplinary team as well. So it's not all about just doing biomechanics day in, day out. It's actually how we fit within a larger unit of people that are all working towards the same overarching goal, which is really about trying to improve the performance of the athletes around us. First and foremost, problem solving, critical thinking, hugely important with pretty much everything we do.
Usually a fair part of the role is problem solving a little bit. So I'm fortunate that when we're working with our coaches, and I've worked with several over numerous years, that they come to you with a problem or a challenge with that they want to improve an athlete's performance, or if a major injury has happened, how do we rehab them, but also prevent it from happening again, or trying to work out how it happened.
My probably trade that I learned, I came from strength and conditioning and coaching, so sport coaching. And the premise of sport coaching is really built upon skill acquisition and motor learning principles. So I probably took for granted that I had that real baseline from my coaching experience in the past. I brought that in to my learned skill set in biomechanics, and I've really merged those.
I do tap into the PA element a little bit, particularly during performance analysis. So during major championships, where sometimes you're not doing the pure biomechanics, pure measurement, but it's more about how you're capturing the video, effective feedback for coaches, and streamlining processes, which is quite critical.
Your three core skill sets, we'll call statistics, data science, and programming one. Biomechanics as how to do, and then how to change is really your skill ac and motor learning.
Apart from the classic biomechanical stuff, it was really obviously the clinical stuff, and then the data science component. So the clinical aspect, which is, you know, the physio-derived stuff, is the core component of what I use. When I finished the PhD, I went and did a computer science degree as well, because I realized once I started kind of dipping into the world of biomechanics, it is kind of heavily sort of data driven. And
so I think every biomechanist starts going into some computer science skills. So that's obviously programming. Some of us go into Python, some in R, some in MATLAB.
Yeah, so things like being able to code in a few different types of languages, having an understanding of electronics and computers and other technologies that are kind of tangential to biomechanics is super important as well.
Just the use of technology, whether it be gym aware, jump platforms, speed gates, just to make training more competitive. But day-to-day stuff, more functionality around GPS technology, so measuring loads. And it's probably not a injury prevention or a performance measurement. It's probably a performance enhancement tool that we try to use to increase the intensity of training and make sure that we're in our football drills getting the required stimulus to prepare them for sevens. Smarter Base, which we do with is our platform for wellness and screenings and all of the above. But we're sort of really trying to use technology now to drive a performance edge, as opposed to just assessing load or assessing wellness or well-being.
We've got some current projects looking at different footwear and sports bra designs. That's pretty much all I can say about that. And then other than that, still on the same, and most of our participant groups happen to be female athletes. We are interested mostly in looking at the movement of female athletes. And so all of our projects around that are looking at different movement patterns, whether that's jumping, sidestepping, landing, all of these really key tasks that go across lots of sports that we've also used in the past as indicators of performance or injury risk. And we're looking at how well our female athletes adapt to various constraints we can put at them. And then from that, using that as either classifying them as potentially injurious or classifying them as highly adaptable, or what we would say is athletic.
We've got a couple looking at machine learning. So we're engaging with other collaborators around the country. So the UWA group through Jackie, but also the AIS group, to be able to create some bespoke apps that streamline some information for coaches. So for example, like we're working on a Javelin app project, which is looking at machine learning to create automated feedback for coaches around release angle, some key angular parameters, key release data, some stride data, which typically for us, that could take a couple of days to turn around.
Yeah, so we've done a fair bit of work with archery over the last few years, working primarily with a lot of their development athletes and helping the coaches, I guess, to provide good qualitative and quantitative feedback to some of these developing archers. So that's using a range of tools like high-speed video, 3D motion capture, and force plates.
So Pitch Ready is really an attempt to kind of bridge the gap between capturing data and then using that to kind of inform return to play decisions, and also trying to set up like injury reduction sort of programs. And the analogy that I tend to use is you've got two broad themes in terms of modifiable risk factors. So you've got the racing car and the racing car driver. The racing car is physical capacity, so how fast you are, how high you jump, all that sort of stuff. And then the race driver is someone being able to go really quick around a racetrack and decision making that means they don't kind of crash into the wall.
We use Pitch Ready to assess a player's readiness to return from an ACL injury. Tim McGrath helped us with that. It was a fantastic tool. It gave us a good idea of, I guess, how the athlete was progressing, what her strengths were, and perhaps what her limitations were, and what things that we could really, I guess, focus on, particularly at that end stage where we were really fighting against time or the clock to try and get her back to give her an opportunity to be picked. So she made the last tournament and had the opportunity to play on, but in the end didn't get picked or selected for the Olympics, but did return to play. So that really helped at the end, both from a coaching tool and a feedback tool, but also helped us with our planning and I guess identified some areas where we needed to work on.
I started as a coach, as I mentioned before, And so I remember, and still coach now, so it is always fresh in my mind, all of the things that drove me crazy that we didn't know. What really bothers us that we have to make assumptions about from a coaching perspective, and then we researched it. Now, I don't think you have to be a coach to be a researcher, but I think that experience and that perspective is invaluable if you want to bridge the divide. So if you don't have that experience, just for a little bit, the minimum you could do is to shadow a coach. And realize, just like you know things, they know things and probably say things with a different language, but don't discount their years of experience and that having insight. They may not say it with a scientific language, but there's probably a good reason they're doing what they're doing. And from there, ask questions. Ask questions of coaches. The question might be why. It might be repeatedly why. It might feel like you're 5 years old again, and the only question you can say is, but why is that? But why is that? And in that, you're probably going to develop research questions that better fit the gap between research and practice.
In female sport, I think there's obviously, it's an emerging profession, I suppose, in Australia. Like, they've obviously been playing elite sport for a long period of time, but professionally, and they're in their infancy comparative to males. So I think the theoretical knowledge of training loads and exercise prescription, I think historically we've always applied what males do to the female athlete, and I think that as I say that, everyone would go, surely not, but I think they do, whereas I think they're totally different. And should be treated that way. So for me, that's probably the most relevant. There's an opportunity, I suppose, to understand menstrual cycle function and hormone profiling better in female athletes and how they respond to different training loads and different stimuluses within that. And again, a very underutilized or under-researched area. You see so much information out there, but then being actually able to, one, apply it, and two, is it appropriate to apply it to your group? So I think as coaches, we become quite risk averse because you don't want to apply something in case you get it wrong. And then there's so many things out there. So therefore, then you're caught in the spell of, well, what do I actually apply and how do I apply it? And as I said, I'm fortunate. I've got some really good people around me, which encourage me and I guess support me to try and do things like differently, or try and do things. I thought I knew a lot when I finished playing rugby, and then 5 years out, I thought, I actually don't know much at all. And now, as I get older and older, I'm realizing, my God, so very little. In the industry, and you're working more and more in it. So, I think that's the real one, and being able to have real life feedback, like real time data feedback. So. Be able to create apps or technology that allows you to break down that running mechanic in the moment and then bring it back. So that's hard, particularly in a cost-effective manner, and particularly when you might only have 10 or 15 minutes at the start of a session or within a session to coach speed. Is how do you be able to give that feedback instantaneously to the athlete?
I think that's one of my strengths, is that I've got enough knowledge to sit across both camps, and I think that's potentially part of the weakness of the approach up till now, is you've got people with high levels of expertise on one side of the fence, and then you've got clinicians who are not always the most technologically advanced sort of people, but then very much have good knowledge in terms of the outputs what we're trying to look for in terms of injury mechanisms and all of that sort of stuff. So I think part of it is that both groups classically speak different languages. Like I found that as a challenge even when I was trying to do the coding, because before I really understood the computer science aspects, I was trying to articulate to a computer scientist what I wanted, and I was just, to me it was so simple what I wanted, but it was like I was speaking French to them. They just had no idea what I was trying to say. So even having done, so I think it's important that the clinicians have good background in some of those aspects and vice versa. It's really, like even the clinical side, clinical is very non-binary, I would say. Like it's very adaptable and moldable, and the human brain can sort of see what it wants, as when when you go to the computer science aspect, you have to bring it down to something binary. Like it has to be black or white. And that's the bit that is hard, I reckon, is trying to come up with a rule that that can fit every aspect of what a clinician is sort of looking for. And that's the bit where it can get lost. It can go into there are attempts to try and do it, and it delves down into so much complexity that the end point gets lost.
There's probably a bit more research that goes on in the sports science space in elite athletes than sometimes what gets published. So sometimes we need answers for what's going on in our cohorts, or we have a readily available cohort, but sometimes it doesn't probably make it out there to the wider public because we're looking for answers to what's going on in our bubble, but don't have time to publish it per se. Yeah, I think we've got to get a little bit creative in how we do research in a servicing type role. I know a lot of us would like to do a lot more of it or have a lot of projects that we have in mind, but sometimes it's a limitation of time. So usually that's through student projects, also PhD partnerships, university partnerships, where we have the ability to consult, provide input, but sometimes we don't have the time to necessarily do it ourselves. But it's something that we're working towards and talking about now that we're sort of starting a new cycle for the Olympics and Paralympics. So we can start looking at some of those practices, some of the research projects that we would like to keep going or ticking along in the background. But yeah, usually we have to get a bit of a creative in working out ways to integrate it into our servicing as well. But usually because we're getting multiple questions from coaches and athletes, and how do we address that or answer their questions effectively and in an informed practice way as well.
A lot of the technologies we use now have actually been around or were first developed decades ago, years ago. So it's unusual to see something completely new that actually comes onto the market. It's kind of just iteration of things gone previously, but certainly with the things like improvements in battery life in devices and the reduction in size of certain devices, it opens up some capacities to do things that we haven't been able to do in the past.
I think the evolution of speed gates, now you can sort of put them up in the gym, and you can use them not just on field, you can use them in gym settings, is really exciting, because then it allows you to chase athletic qualities both on the field and in the gym. Obviously GPS is, the technology is getting better and better. The quality of data, we've got longer periods of time now, longitudinal data sets that we can now compare, and I think as long as you know how to use it and what you're looking for, it can be a really important tool.
I'm really curious to see where some of the machine learning stuff does take us, and some of the big data, and how that can inform some of the practices that we do.
There's this trade-off between efficiency and accuracy, I think, at the moment, where there are bits of technology that can be quite efficient in terms of don't require lots of logistical effort to implement, like your IMUs and markerless technology and video analysis and all these sorts of things. But then on the flip side of it, at the moment, there's a bit of a trade-off in terms of the accuracy of what you get on the output. So there's this not in the accuracy in terms of the measure itself, but on the output. Like if we're talking clinical outputs and we're trying to get literally what the body is doing at any given sort of point in time, is that marker-based things have some challenges in terms of implementation in big scale, but the accuracy is really well defined and is easy to quantify, and all those sorts of things, is where things like IMUs are much more efficient in terms of just you put it on someone and you go and get them to do things, and you can sort of get some measure. But it depends. In terms of the outputs, with what you can actually derive in that in terms of a meaningful sense, becomes a much narrower sort of spec that you can sort of chase.
I mean, in biomechanics, we all have this love-hate affair with markers. So I think probably all of us are very, very, very keen to really see markerless motion capture actually be within the realm of our markered motion capture. I think we're a lot closer, but we always think we're close, and then it's never quite there. So I see that in the near future, but if I said anything, that's probably the one. And then very close to that is this idea of being able to predict loading within, oh gosh, loading is such a hot topic word. So I better say joint torque and joint powers at the time without actually having to have the ground reaction forces from a force plate and our markered motion capture. When we get to that from just multiple video, our next foray will be how to use all of that data rapidly.
Well, where to start? So I have to say lockdown has forced us to think a little bit more creatively in how we provide servicing or practices. But I never thought when it first started that I'd be trying to do biomech over Zoom and providing feedback through a Zoom platform on someone's block technique, or when you can't access gym equipment, how you then start thinking about drills in a very unique way. So I never thought we'd have athletes strapped to a discus cage in a harness trying to replicate a block setup where normally we'd be able to access a foam pit, but can't from that perspective. So it's forced us to think outside of the box a little bit more. I will not miss trying to instruct someone how to do biomechanics remotely over a Zoom platform when sometimes the internet doesn't particularly work too well. So I'm looking forward to being able to try. That's tested my patience a little bit. So I'm looking forward to being able to do that more in person. I think there's things that will now stay in what we're doing. Just because it happened by chance, not because we thought of it. It was just like, I know coaches have used some of those drills because they're actually now more effective than what they were doing before, just because they were forced to use different equipment. So it's been handy from that point of view. I tend to be like to being a planned person. So it has forced me out of that comfort zone of, you have a plan, next minute you're ripping it up because there's been a restriction change. So you're changing that again and off to the drawing board again.
Over the last 18 months, my role right now has a lot more research focus because we have a grant. And I mean, I love that. And like I've said, I like being on the floor of the lab, doing the data. It's like my happy space. And then doing a lot more outreach with community, a lot more outreach as far as speaking to different groups, sporting groups. And that has been great because at the end of the day, that what we mentioned about this translation of research to practice requires someone to translate it. They're probably not going to read our papers. I hate to tell everybody, but the number of people outside of academia that read academic research is really small. So it is up to us to do public forums and to be able to speak in a language that is understandable and doesn't dumb down the research. It just literally translates that research so it can be used.
Yeah, our role's changed a fair bit over the last 18 months, kind of a little bit intermittently though, because we've had a couple of lockdowns here in Canberra, which has meant we've had to work from home and haven't been able to really have access to athletes. But then the lockdowns elsewhere in the country, like particularly Sydney and Melbourne, have meant that we've had less athletes coming from interstate onto the AIS campus as part of a camp. So it's certainly disrupted the way we interact with athletes a fair bit over the last year. Some of the things that I think have improved over that time is actually our ability to connect with people online like this. And I think that ability to realize that you don't necessarily have to be sitting at your desk to collaborate with people, or fly across the country to collaborate with people is a pretty important thing that's been a nice outcome out of this.
So it's been challenging for us because we've had to cancel heaps of work. Like I was supposed to do consultancy, like an AFL club 2 weeks ago, had to cancel because of the couldn't get into the border. Supposed to be doing some NBA work, but I was supposed to go over there in October. Can't get over there because there's too big a risk that I'll be sort of stuck over there and can't get home. So what it has meant is that it's probably fast tracked our ability to try. Like for us, it's about we're trying to use the things that we've learned and try and get them on a bigger scale. Like, so it's not just me as the central linchpin in all of these kind of return to play things with pitch ready. So what it has meant is that we're still doing some of these things overseas, but it's about me trying to teach them how to get the outputs that we're after and using the software components. And there's lots of things that we can do sort of remotely. Over time, I think that'll be a good thing. It means that if I don't have to physically travel somewhere to do things, then that will make my wife much happier.
Yeah, no, I think you certainly learn to become more adaptable. I don't think the head coach and I probably wrote that many training plans or that many versions of it, and then obviously with lockdowns and travel restrictions and borders closing and borders opening, I guess the fluency of that. So that's one. Two is then developing your training model, as we just touched upon, your own philosophy and ideologies, but having a really good training model and being able to apply that within that, because if you don't know what you're trying to do, it's very hard to be agile and adaptable. Yeah, the third one is with a loss of staff and resources is you become a jack of all trades. So I think that's really important in the sense of you might have areas, might be strength, speed and power, but one thing you learn is you've got to be a better coach at all of them. So you learn through virtue of coaching so much, and then you're dancing between being a manager and a coach. I think for people in our industry is now the way that it's going is trying to create opportunities for you to professionally develop and formulate your own ideas, formulate your own training model, but then also be able to be better on the grass coaching because you've got to be able to do that. And then you've got to be able to go away and manage data, manage people and bring it all together. So that's probably the last 18 months has changed that space. And so it's exciting for people that can really grow and develop all those skills. It's also confronting because you're probably faced with, there's so many situations where you're like, I feel I'm out of my comfort zone. It's a big challenge. It's a lot of hours. I think in that is being able to surround yourself with people that challenge you and always create, really create, I guess, robust conversations. Where am I going? Am I going in the right direction? What do I need to be better? How do I create a competitive advantage for my group? That's probably the one thing I've probably taken away from the last 18 months.
There we have it. Thank you for tuning into our session. We hope you enjoyed the insight from our guests, who all volunteered their time to speak with me over the last week or so. A massive thank you to Sophia, Dan, Adam, Emma, Tom, and Tim. There will be extended cuts released in the coming weeks of our interviews for anyone who might be interested. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and YouTube, as well as these other accounts, to see those extended cuts and all the other interesting things we get up to. One note, we had originally organised to have Dr. Adam Hunter of the AIS on board as well. However, some technical issues meant we couldn't get him into this cut. Keep an eye out on the extended editions where we'll get his insight. Again, a massive thanks to Wayne and the rest of the organising committee for having us. And everyone, have a great conference.